He served me with divorce papers on New Year's Eve. 3 weeks later, I came back with something no one in his family expected to see. They all stared at me as though I had become a stranger overnight, but the truth was much simpler than that. They had never really known me in the first place. Last Christmas was supposed to be the happiest morning of my life. I arrived early with a tiny gift bag in my hands, a folded ultrasound appointment tucked safely inside my purse, and more hope than I had allowed myself to feel in years. Instead of hearing congratulations, I heard my husband say words that shattered every piece of the future I thought we were building together. "That baby is not mine." The room fell silent. My mother-in-law slowly folded her napkin and looked at me with the kind of disappointment that assumes guilt before a single question has been asked. My husband slid a manila envelope across the dining table. "I already called my attorney," he said. "You can sign the papers today." I remember staring at the Christmas tree behind him, the white lights reflecting against the living room window while nobody asked whether I was all right. Nobody asked for my side of the story. If you have ever felt judged before anyone listened to your heart, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, but only if this story truly resonates with you. I would also love to know where you are watching from. Tell me your city, your country, and your local time. It always amazes me how stories can connect people from every corner of the world. My name is Emily Carter. I am 31 years old, and until that Christmas morning, I believed my marriage was the safest place I had ever known. Looking back now, I realize it was the beginning of everything falling apart. Ryan and I had been married for almost 6 years. We lived in Franklin, Tennessee, in a quiet neighborhood where every December the front porches glowed with wreaths and warm lights. Our little brick house smelled like cinnamon candles most evenings because I always lit one before he came home from work. I liked believing small routines mattered. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they only make it hurt more when everything changes. We had spent nearly 3 years hoping for a baby. There had been appointments, disappointing phone calls, quiet drives home without speaking, and nights when I woke up to find Ryan staring at the ceiling instead of sleeping. When I finally saw those 2 pink lines, I did not tell anyone, not even him. I wanted to surprise him on Christmas morning with our families together. I imagined tears, hugs, laughter, and maybe his mother crying for the first time since I had known her. Instead, I carefully wrapped a tiny pair of white baby socks with the words, "See you next Christmas, Grandma." They rested inside a small cream-colored gift bag on the passenger seat while I drove through the cold morning air before sunrise. Christmas music played softly through the speakers. I caught myself smiling at every red traffic light because I kept rehearsing what I wanted to say. "Ryan," I whispered to the empty car, "we are finally going to be parents." I laughed at myself, embarrassed even though nobody could hear me. His parents always hosted Christmas breakfast. Margaret believed traditions held families together. Breakfast began at 8 o'clock sharp every year. I arrived at 7:15 because I wanted a few quiet minutes to give Ryan the news before everyone else walked in. Richard opened the front door wearing his old green flannel shirt. "Emily," he said with a warm smile, "you are early." "I brought cinnamon rolls," I answered, lifting the baking dish slightly. "And coffee. Come in before you freeze." The house smelled like fresh pine and roasted coffee beans. Christmas records played softly from an old speaker in the kitchen. Margaret was arranging silverware with perfect precision. She barely looked up. "The plates go on the dining table," she said. "Good morning to you too," I replied gently. She nodded without smiling. That had become normal long ago. Nothing dramatic, just countless little reminders that I never quite belonged. Lauren walked into the kitchen holding her phone. "Emily," she said, "Mom wants the serving bowls on the buffet table. You always forget." "I have not forgotten," I answered quietly. "I was just setting these down first." She shrugged. "Whatever works." Ryan came downstairs a few minutes later wearing the navy sweater I had bought him the previous winter. He kissed my forehead. "You got here early. I wanted a few minutes with you." "Can it wait until after breakfast?" he asked while checking his phone. "Dad needs help outside." "It is important." He smiled distractedly. "Everything is important on Christmas." Then he walked toward the garage before I could answer. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and touched the little gift bag. "Not yet," I told myself. "There will be another moment." There is always another moment. At least that was what I believed then. By the time the rest of the family arrived, the dining room buzzed with conversations about football, travel plans, and grandchildren. Margaret handed me another stack of dishes. "Could you refill everyone's coffee?" she asked. "You always make it just right." It sounded polite enough that nobody else noticed how naturally I had become the one serving everyone else while the family sat together around the table. Richard quietly thanked me each time I filled his mug. Nobody else did. I carried the cream-colored gift bag with me from room to room, waiting for the right moment. Nobody noticed it. Nobody asked what was inside. Then, as Ryan walked past me in the hallway, his eyes drifted toward the corner of the bag where the medical envelope was barely visible above the tissue paper. His expression changed so quickly that my heartbeat stumbled. He reached toward the bag before I could react. "Emily," he said slowly, "what exactly is this?" Ryan's fingers closed around the edge of the cream-colored envelope before I could stop him. "It is private," I said quietly. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. He did not answer. He slid the folded paper halfway out, his eyes moving across the first few printed lines. I watched the color drain from his face, not all at once, but slowly, as though every sentence he believed he understood pushed him farther away from me. "What is that?" Margaret asked from the dining room. Ryan kept staring at the page. "Ryan?" she repeated. He looked at me instead of answering her. There was something unfamiliar in his expression. Not fear, not confusion. Something harder. Something already making up its mind. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "From my doctor," I answered. "I wanted to tell you before everyone else." He folded the paper without letting me see which page he had actually read. "Mom," he called, never taking his eyes off me, "can you come here?" The cheerful conversations in the dining room faded into silence. Chairs scraped softly across the hardwood floor as everyone gathered near the hallway. The tiny gift bag still rested in my hands. Suddenly, it felt heavier than it had inside the car. Margaret reached Ryan first. "What happened?" she asked. Ryan handed her only the front page of the medical paperwork. She glanced at it for barely 3 seconds before looking directly at me. "Emily," she said, "is there something you need to explain?" My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. That always happened when I was frightened. The world became strangely quiet. I could hear the furnace humming beneath the floor and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock near the staircase. "There is nothing to explain," I replied. I was going to surprise Ryan. Lauren crossed her arms. "That does not sound like what he is reading." Richard frowned. "Maybe everyone should sit down first." Margaret ignored him. "Ryan?" He swallowed. "The dates do not make sense." I blinked. "What dates?" "Do not pretend you do not know." "Ryan, I honestly do not understand what you are talking about." He unfolded the paper again but never showed it to me. "You expect me to believe this pregnancy timeline?" I stared at him, unable to understand why he sounded like a stranger. "You never even let me explain." "Explain what?" Lauren interrupted. "Who the father is." Her words landed harder than I expected. Not because I believed them, because she spoke them so easily, as though this possibility had been waiting quietly in the room long before I walked through the front door. My eyes drifted toward the Christmas tree. Beneath it sat dozens of wrapped presents, each tagged with careful handwriting. 6 Christmases, 6 years of birthdays, anniversaries, Sunday dinners, hospital visits with Richard after his knee replacement, helping Margaret organize Thanksgiving, remembering everyone's favorite desserts, smiling through conversations that often left me feeling invisible. None of those memories seemed to matter anymore. Margaret stepped closer. "Emily," she said softly, almost gently, "if there is something you have done, honesty would be better than embarrassment later." I looked at her. "You have already decided I am guilty." "Nobody said that. You did not have to." Richard cleared his throat. "We should hear both of them." Margaret sighed without looking at her husband. "Sometimes the facts speak for themselves." Those words carried me backward to another December 2 years earlier. I had accidentally broken one of her antique ornaments while decorating the tree. "Some people simply do not understand how to care for valuable things," she had said then. Ryan never defended me. Later that evening he wrapped his arms around me in our kitchen and whispered, "She does not mean anything by it. Just let it go." I had let it go. There was the anniversary dinner when Lauren laughed because I brought homemade rolls instead of ordering from the expensive bakery everyone else used. Emily likes doing everything the difficult way, she joked. Everyone smiled politely. Ryan squeezed my knee beneath the table. Ignore it, he whispered. I ignored it. There was Father's Day when Daniel asked if I planned to work fewer hours once we had children. Before I could answer, Margaret smiled across the table. Emily has always been better at taking care of other people's children than building her own family. Ryan changed the subject. Later he kissed my forehead and said, Mom worries too much. Do not let it ruin your day. I swallowed every hurt because I believed marriage meant choosing peace over pride. Standing in that hallway on Christmas morning, I realized peace had become another word for silence. Ryan finally looked away from me. I trusted you. Then trust me long enough to let me explain. Explain what? He asked again. The paperwork. Show it to me first. For one brief second, nobody moved. Then Margaret quietly folded the document and slipped it back into the envelope herself. That will not be necessary. Something inside me tightened. Why would she keep me from seeing my own paperwork? The thought disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived because it felt impossible. Surely there was a simple explanation. There always had been before. Richard stepped toward me. Emily, why do not we all sit down? Breakfast is getting cold. Before I could answer, my eyes fell to the envelope Margaret was still holding. A small yellow laboratory sticker peeked out beneath the folded pages. I frowned. That sticker should not have been there. I remembered exactly what my doctor had handed me at the clinic, and I suddenly realized the envelope in Margaret's hands was no longer arranged the way I had packed it just an hour earlier. Margaret's fingers tightened around the envelope before I could ask for it back. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that belonged in photographs rather than real conversations. We can sort this out after breakfast, she said. There is no reason to upset everyone before we eat. It is my paperwork, I answered quietly. I would like it back. Ryan stepped between us without touching either one of us. Not yet. His voice was low enough that only the people nearest the hallway could hear it. I think we need to understand what we are looking at first. Then let me explain. You have had plenty of chances. The words settled over me like cold rain. They were unfair, but they also sounded rehearsed, as though he had already repeated them to himself before saying them aloud. Daniel adjusted his glasses and glanced toward the dining room. Maybe we should move this conversation somewhere private, Lauren laughed softly. Private? Everybody is family. That sentence lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Everybody is family. I wondered if she realized what those words excluded. Richard rubbed the back of his neck. Emily deserves to speak. Margaret looked toward her husband with patient disappointment. Richard, nobody is stopping her from speaking. Then she turned back to me. We are simply asking for honesty. I almost smiled because honesty had never been the problem. Being believed had always been the problem. My eyes drifted toward the small gift bag still hanging from my wrist. The white baby socks remained inside, untouched. I had imagined Margaret opening them with happy tears. Instead, nobody even knew they were there. Ryan noticed the bag. What else is in there? A Christmas present. Show me. No. His eyebrows lifted. No? It was supposed to be opened differently. Lauren folded her arms. Why are you suddenly acting so secretive? I wanted to tell her that privacy and secrecy were not the same thing, but I already knew the distinction would be wasted. Margaret carefully placed my envelope on the narrow console table beside the front door. The paperwork is staying here until we finish this conversation. I looked at the envelope again. The yellow laboratory sticker was still visible beneath the edge of the flap. My doctor had never attached anything like that. I remembered slipping every document into the envelope myself at the clinic before driving home the day before Christmas Eve. Every page had been perfectly aligned, every corner perfectly flat. Now one sheet sat slightly higher than the others. Someone had moved them. The realization settled quietly into my chest. Not proof, not certainty, just enough to make me uncomfortable. Ryan noticed where I was looking. Without saying anything, he picked up the envelope again and held it against his side. The movement was small, almost instinctive, but something about it felt protective. Not protective of me, protective of whatever was inside. Ryan, I said softly, please let me see my paperwork. Later. Why later? Because I said so. The sentence surprised both of us. I saw it immediately in his face. Ryan was not usually controlling, indecisive sometimes, easily influenced often, but never commanding. The words sounded borrowed. Margaret reached for his arm. "You are doing the right thing." I watched her hand remain on his sleeve 1 second longer than necessary. She had always known exactly how to reassure him while quietly directing him. It reminded me of another Christmas, 4 years earlier, when Ryan and I had planned to spend the afternoon at my parents' house in Murfreesboro. Margaret called while we were packing the car. "Family stays together on Christmas Day," she had said. Ryan looked at me apologetically after ending the call. "Maybe we can visit your parents tomorrow instead." Tomorrow became next weekend. Next weekend became never. My father never complained. My mother simply wrapped our presents anyway. Every year. I blinked away the memory as Daniel cleared his throat. "Emily, did you tell anyone else about the pregnancy?" "No. Not even your parents?" "I wanted Ryan to know first." Richard looked at me carefully. "That sounds like something you would do." His quiet kindness almost made me cry. Almost. Margaret answered before I could. People say many things when they are under pressure. I folded my hands together to keep them from trembling. "Margaret, I have loved your son for almost 6 years. Why is it so easy to believe the worst about me?" She hesitated only briefly. "Because life teaches women my age to notice warning signs. Or because you decided long ago that I would never truly belong here." Silence followed. Nobody defended me. Nobody challenged her. The grandfather clock chimed once, marking the half-hour. Outside, neighborhood children laughed somewhere beyond the frosted windows. Christmas morning continued for everyone else, while mine quietly unraveled. Ryan finally reached into the envelope and removed another sheet of paper. He frowned. "What is this?" Margaret leaned closer. "Let me see. It is just—" He stopped reading halfway through the page. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Confusion replaced certainty for only a heartbeat before he folded the paper again. Too quickly. Much too quickly. I noticed Daniel notice it too. "What was that?" Daniel asked. "Nothing important," Ryan answered. "Then why did you stop reading?" Ryan slid the page back inside without replying. My stomach tightened. Whatever he had just seen, he did not want anyone else looking at it. I took one slow step forward. "Ryan," he looked at me. "You just found something you were not expecting. Did you not?" He said nothing. "Let me have the envelope." "No." "Why?" "Because—" He glanced toward his mother before finishing the sentence. "Because we are handling this together." That was when I understood something I had never allowed myself to think before. For years I believed every difficult moment in our marriage had been caused by misunderstandings, unfortunate timing, or Ryan's desire to keep peace inside his family. Standing there, watching him search his mother's face before answering me, I wondered if I had misunderstood something much larger all along. Then Margaret quietly slipped one folded page from my envelope into the pocket of her cardigan, believing nobody had seen her do it. Except I had. For a long moment I wondered if I had imagined it. Margaret's hand rested naturally against the pocket of her cardigan, as though nothing unusual had happened. Nobody else seemed to notice the quick movement. Nobody except me. I could still see the slight outline of the folded page beneath the fabric. My page. My medical record. My pulse remained steady, but something deeper shifted inside me. Not anger. Not yet. It was the quiet feeling that comes when a puzzle piece suddenly belongs somewhere it never should have fit. "Emily," Ryan said, his voice sounding tired now instead of angry, "why do not we all take a breath?" I looked at him for several seconds before answering. "I have been taking deep breaths for years." The sentence escaped before I could soften it. Richard lowered his eyes toward the hardwood floor. Daniel adjusted the cuffs of his shirt. Lauren looked away toward the dining room where Christmas music continued playing as if none of us had stopped celebrating. Margaret smiled politely. "This conversation is becoming emotional." "Someone just took a page from my medical records," I replied. Her smile never changed. "Emily, I have no idea what you are talking about." Before I could answer, the front doorbell rang. One clear chime echoed through the house. Everyone paused. Richard glanced toward the foyer. "I will get it." We all remained where we stood while he crossed the hallway. The front door opened, allowing a rush of cold December air to sweep through the house. I heard unfamiliar footsteps and a warm voice. "Merry Christmas, Richard. I hope I am not interrupting." Richard laughed softly for the first time that morning. "Not at all, Frank. Come in." A tall man in his late 60s stepped inside carrying a neatly wrapped box and wearing a dark wool overcoat dusted with tiny snowflakes. His silver hair peeked from beneath a navy knit cap. I recognized him immediately. Frank Sullivan, retired judge, family friend to the Walkers for decades, one of the most respected men in Williamson County. He removed his gloves, looked around the hallway, and then his eyes landed on me. His expression changed instantly. "Emily." His voice carried genuine warmth. "I was hoping you would be here." Every conversation stopped. Frank walked directly toward me instead of greeting anyone else first. He extended both hands, and I instinctively accepted them. "It is good to see you again," he said. "How have you been?" "I have been well," I answered quietly. "Thank you." His smile reached his eyes. "I still tell people about the work you did last spring. You handled yourself with remarkable grace." My heartbeat skipped once. I answered carefully. "That was a team effort." "Perhaps," he replied, "but I remember exactly who stayed after everyone else had gone home." He released my hands with quiet respect. Nobody spoke. Ryan looked from Frank to me as though trying to place pieces of a story he had never heard. Lauren frowned. "You two know each other?" Frank looked pleasantly surprised by the question. "Of course we do." He turned back toward me. "I assumed everyone here already knew." I offered only a small smile. "There has never been much reason to talk about it." Frank nodded once, understanding far more than he said aloud. Margaret stepped forward smoothly. "Frank, breakfast is almost ready." "Wonderful," he answered without taking his eyes completely off me. "Emily, I have wanted to thank you properly for months. That is not necessary." "I disagree." His tone remained gentle. "People who quietly carry difficult responsibilities rarely receive enough thanks." Ryan's forehead tightened slightly. "What responsibilities?" Frank glanced toward him, then back at me. Something passed silently between us. Not a secret. More like mutual permission not to explain. "Your wife has always been exceptionally thoughtful," Frank answered at last. "You should be very proud of her." Ryan forced a polite smile, but I noticed uncertainty creeping into his posture for the first time all morning. Margaret quickly changed the subject. "Frank, let me take your coat." While she reached for it, the folded page inside her cardigan shifted slightly. Only a fraction of an inch, but enough for me to recognize the edge of the yellow laboratory sticker again. Frank followed my gaze without appearing to. His eyes lingered on Margaret's pocket for less than a second before returning to my face. He did not ask a question. He simply observed. That alone made me feel less alone. We moved toward the dining room together. Frank deliberately pulled out the chair beside him. "Emily, would you join me?" Margaret hesitated almost imperceptibly. Usually I sat near the far end of the table beside Lauren. Today there was no graceful way to refuse without appearing rude. I quietly accepted the seat. "Thank you." As everyone settled, Frank leaned toward me just enough that only I could hear him. "You look worried. I am beginning to think I missed something important." He studied me for a moment. "Trust your memory." 4 simple words. Nothing more. Yet they settled into my thoughts with unexpected weight. Across the table, Ryan watched us speaking in low voices. "How exactly did you two meet?" he finally asked. Frank smiled. "Professional circumstances." "Professional?" Ryan repeated. "Emily?" I looked down at my untouched coffee. "It was a long time ago." "Not that long," Frank said kindly. "Some things simply deserve discretion." Daniel looked intrigued. Lauren looked confused. Richard looked quietly pleased. Margaret looked uncomfortable for the first time since the morning began. She reached toward her water glass too quickly, and as she did, the folded paper slipped halfway from her cardigan pocket before she hurriedly pushed it back inside. Frank saw it. I saw him see it. He said nothing, but his calm expression became noticeably more serious. Then he looked directly at me and gave the smallest nod, as though he had just confirmed something neither of us was ready to say aloud. Frank's quiet nod stayed with me long after the conversation around the table resumed. It was such a small gesture that anyone else could have missed it, yet it carried the strange comfort of knowing at least one person in that room believed I was not imagining what I had seen. Margaret began serving breakfast as though nothing unusual had happened. Plates moved from hand to hand. Coffee cups filled again. The scent of maple syrup and baked cinnamon drifted through the dining room. But the warmth that usually belonged to Christmas morning had disappeared. Ryan barely touched his food. Every few seconds I caught him glancing toward the envelope resting beside his chair. It was no longer my medical records alone. It had become something everyone feared without understanding why. Frank unfolded his napkin carefully. "Emily," he said, his tone conversational, "are you still volunteering on Thursday evenings?" I paused before answering. "Not as often as I used to. That is unfortunate. They still speak very highly of you." Lauren looked confused. "Volunteering where?" I picked up my coffee mug before answering. "Just a community program," Frank smiled gently. "You always make everything sound much smaller than it is." I offered no reply. Across the table, Ryan frowned slightly. "You never mentioned that. You never asked," I answered without accusation. The words surprised both of us because they were true. Our marriage had slowly become a collection of practical conversations. Grocery lists, mortgage payments, family dinners, weekend schedules. Somewhere along the way, curiosity disappeared. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Frank, what kind of program was it?" Frank buttered a piece of toast before speaking. "Families dealing with difficult legal situations." Emily spent countless evenings helping people understand paperwork that frightened them. Margaret looked at me for the first time in several minutes. "Legal paperwork?" "Mostly helping people find the right resources," I answered calmly. "Nothing more." Frank tilted his head slightly. "You always leave out the difficult part." "It was never about me." "Perhaps not." He smiled. "But I remember many grateful people." Ryan stared at me. "How long have you been doing that?" "Several years." Why did I never know? I looked down at the coffee swirling gently inside my mug. Because whenever I tried to tell you about my day, the conversation usually turned back to work or family plans. Silence followed. It was not an accusation, it was simply a memory spoken aloud. Richard quietly cleared his throat. "Emily has always been generous with her time." Margaret forced a polite smile. "Helping people is admirable." Frank nodded. "It certainly is, especially when it involves responsibilities most people would never accept." He stopped there. No explanations. No details. Just another small piece that did not seem to fit the picture the family had built of me. I noticed Ryan becoming increasingly restless. His fingers tapped lightly against the edge of the envelope. Finally, he looked directly at Frank. "You keep talking like Emily has done something extraordinary." Frank considered the question before answering. "Extraordinary is often just ordinary work performed consistently over many years." Ryan frowned. "That does not really answer me." "Not every answer belongs to me." Frank's voice remained warm, but final. Margaret quickly interrupted. "We are drifting away from the real issue." Her hand rested briefly over the envelope again. "This paperwork is what matters today." Frank's eyes followed the movement. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "or perhaps understanding the person holding the paperwork matters just as much." Nobody replied. Outside, snow began falling again, covering the backyard fence in another thin white layer. I watched tiny flakes collect against the kitchen window and found myself remembering another winter afternoon several years earlier. Ryan had come home discouraged after failing an important licensing exam. He had thrown his briefcase onto the couch and said, "Maybe I am not good enough." I had spent hours helping him organize a study schedule, bringing him coffee late at night, encouraging him every time frustration returned. He passed on the next attempt. We celebrated with takeout pizza on the living room floor because we could not afford anything fancy back then. I never regretted supporting him. Love had never felt like a sacrifice until I realized support had only been expected to travel in one direction. A vibration interrupted my thoughts. My phone, resting beside my plate, lit up quietly. I glanced down. The screen displayed only one name, Dr. Hannah Brooks, my obstetrician. Before I could reach for it, Ryan noticed the caller. "Are you not going to answer?" he asked. "I can call her back." The phone stopped ringing before I picked it up. A second later, a voicemail notification appeared. followed almost immediately by a secure patient message preview. Only one sentence was visible before the screen dimmed. Please contact me regarding the updated laboratory documentation. My stomach tightened. Updated. I had not requested any updated documentation. Ryan had already seen enough to read the first line. Updated? He repeated quietly. Margaret looked from him to me. Updated what? I locked the phone without opening the message. Probably routine paperwork. Frank looked at me carefully but asked nothing. He simply nodded once, trusting that I had a reason not to speak. Ryan was still staring at my phone. Emily. Yes? Has your doctor been trying to reach you before today? I answered honestly. No. He leaned back slowly. Then why would there suddenly be updated laboratory documentation? Nobody at the table had an answer. Not even me. Across the room, the envelope containing my medical records rested exactly where Margaret had placed it. Yet for the first time that morning, Ryan looked less interested in accusing me than in understanding what else might already be inside those papers that none of us had actually read. The room remained unusually quiet after Ryan repeated the words, "Updated laboratory documentation." Nobody reached for another bite of breakfast. Even the Christmas music drifting softly from the living room seemed farther away now. I picked up my phone, turned it over in my hands for a moment, and then looked at Ryan. I honestly do not know why Dr. Brooks sent that message. He searched my face, as though waiting for hesitation that never came. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to believe that I have answered honestly. My voice stayed calm. It surprised even me. A few hours earlier, I would have done almost anything to convince him that I had done nothing wrong. Now I realized convincing someone who had already chosen suspicion was impossible. Frank quietly placed his coffee cup onto the saucer. There is a simple solution. Everyone looked toward him. Call the doctor, he said. Margaret reacted immediately. Today? On Christmas morning? Medical offices have emergency coverage, Frank answered evenly. If everyone here is relying on medical paperwork, then perhaps everyone should hear directly from the medical professionals instead of making assumptions. Ryan rubbed both hands across his face. Maybe we should wait. I looked at him carefully. Only 20 minutes earlier he had wanted immediate answers. Now he wanted delay. The change did not escape anyone. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Actually, Frank has a point. Lauren frowned. You cannot just call someone's doctor. Emily can, Frank replied, if she chooses. He turned toward me without pressure. Only if you are comfortable. I looked down at the phone again. My thumb hovered over the voicemail notification. Before I could press it, another call appeared on the screen. Williamson Medical Center. The entire table noticed the hospital name. My heartbeat slowed. You should answer, Frank said quietly. I nodded and accepted the call. This is Emily Carter. Good morning, Mrs. Carter. This is Melissa from Labor and Delivery Support. Dr. Brooks asked us to make sure you received her message. I saw it a moment ago. Wonderful. She reviewed your laboratory packet early this morning because an additional verification report was uploaded overnight. She wanted to personally discuss it with you before anyone misunderstood the documentation. I glanced briefly toward Ryan. His shoulders stiffened. Is everything all right? I asked. There is nothing urgent regarding your health or your pregnancy, Melissa answered. Dr. Brooks simply believes the complete packet should be reviewed together because one page was separated from the original laboratory sequence before the final upload. My fingers tightened around the phone, one page separated. Frank closed his eyes briefly, almost as if a quiet suspicion had just been confirmed. Melissa continued. Dr. Brooks would prefer not to discuss details over the phone. She has availability first thing Monday morning. Thank you, I whispered. Please tell her I will be there. The call ended. Nobody spoke immediately. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. One page was separated? Ryan looked at me. What does that mean? I answered honestly. I do not know yet. Margaret spoke too quickly. Laboratories make clerical mistakes all the time. Frank looked at her calmly. Perhaps. But mistakes usually deserve investigation before judgment. She looked away. Richard folded his hands together. Emily. His voice carried quiet regret. Has anyone actually allowed you to explain anything this morning? I smiled sadly. Not really. He lowered his eyes. Then I owe you an apology. The words changed something inside the room. They were small, but they were the first acknowledgement that the morning had not been fair. Ryan looked toward his father. "Dad," Richard interrupted gently. "Son, certainty without patience can become cruelty." Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since I had arrived, he seemed uncertain not about me but about himself. His confidence had begun to fracture. Lauren shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Maybe we all overreacted." Margaret immediately answered, "Nobody overreacted. We are simply protecting our family." Frank rested both hands on the table. "Emily is your family." The sentence settled over everyone. Margaret did not answer. Neither did Ryan. I watched him stare at the envelope beside his plate. It suddenly looked less like evidence against me, and more like something he no longer understood. He reached for it slowly. "Emily." His voice had lost its sharpness. "Would you like to look through these papers with me?" It was the first invitation he had offered all morning. I nodded once. "Yes." He handed me the envelope without argument. As I opened it, I immediately noticed the pages were out of order. The laboratory summary that should have been near the back now sat between two unrelated reports. One document was missing entirely. I looked toward Margaret. She remained perfectly still. "There should be another page," I said quietly. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes." Ryan looked confused. "What page?" Before I could answer, Frank spoke. "The page that disappeared into a cardigan pocket about 15 minutes ago." Every face turned toward Margaret. Her expression finally changed. Not dramatically, just enough for the certainty to disappear from her eyes. "Frank," she said carefully, "I think you misunderstood what you saw. I rarely say I witnessed something unless I am certain." The retired judge's voice remained calm. There was no accusation in it, only quiet confidence. Margaret reached instinctively toward her cardigan pocket. Then she stopped halfway. Ryan noticed the movement. So did Daniel. The room seemed to shrink around us. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody argued. Yet the balance had shifted in a way that could never be undone. Ryan slowly stood from his chair. His eyes remained fixed on his mother's pocket. "Mom," he asked softly, "what exactly did you take from Emily's medical records?" Ryan's question remained suspended in the room long after he spoke it. "Mom, what exactly did you take from Emily's medical records?" Nobody reached for a coffee cup. Nobody looked toward the Christmas tree anymore. The only sound came from the soft hiss of the fireplace in the next room. Margaret kept her hand against the pocket of her cardigan as though removing it would somehow make the moment disappear. "Ryan," she said carefully, "you are letting this get out of proportion." "Did you take something?" he asked again. His voice had changed. It no longer carried certainty, only a quiet need for an answer. Margaret sighed. "I removed one page because I wanted to read it more carefully after breakfast." Daniel frowned immediately. "You removed a page from Emily's private medical records?" "I was protecting this family." Frank remained perfectly still. Protection without permission often becomes interference. Margaret turned toward him. "With all due respect, Frank, this is a family matter." It became more than a family matter the moment someone's medical documents were altered. Richard slowly stood from his chair. His movement was unhurried, almost reluctant. I had rarely seen him contradict his wife during the years I had known them. "Margaret," he said quietly, "please return the page." She looked at him in disbelief. "You are taking her side?" Richard shook his head. "I am taking the side of what is right." The sentence seemed to surprise everyone, including himself. Lauren looked from her father to her mother. "Mom, maybe we should just put everything back together." Margaret stared at her daughter. "You think I did something wrong too?" Lauren hesitated. I do not know anymore." The uncertainty in her voice spread across the room like a crack moving through glass. Daniel removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Ryan," he said quietly, "did you actually read every page before accusing Emily?" Ryan remained silent. Daniel asked again, "Every page?" Ryan lowered his eyes toward the envelope. "No. Did you ask her doctor any questions?" "No." "Did you ask Emily to explain?" Ryan looked toward me, and for the first time since I had arrived that morning, he could not hold my gaze. "No," he admitted. Another silence settled over the dining room. This one felt different. It no longer belonged to me. It belonged to them. Richard slowly exhaled. Then perhaps we all reached conclusions before we had the truth. Margaret immediately answered, "The dates looked wrong." I finally spoke. "The dates looked incomplete." Everyone turned toward me. My voice remained calm. "There is a difference." Frank nodded almost imperceptibly. Ryan looked at me again. "Emily, if I made a mistake." I gently interrupted him. "You did not simply make a mistake." He swallowed. "I know. You decided who I was before asking who I had always been." He closed his eyes briefly. Across the table, Lauren whispered, almost to herself, "I cannot believe we all just stood here." Daniel looked toward his sister. "We did more than stand here." Nobody argued with him. Margaret reached into her pocket at last. Slowly, reluctantly, she removed the folded page. It remained creased where she had hidden it. She placed it on the table without unfolding it. "Here." Ryan stared at the paper but did not touch it immediately. "Why?" he asked his mother quietly. "Why would you hide this?" "Because," she struggled for words, "because I thought there might be something there that explained everything." Frank answered gently before anyone else could. "Sometimes people become so determined to confirm what they already believe that they stop looking for what is actually true." Nobody disagreed. Ryan finally picked up the missing page. His hands trembled slightly. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing the crease against the table. His eyes moved across the first few lines. Then he stopped. His breathing changed almost instantly. "This," he whispered. Daniel leaned forward. "What is it?" Ryan did not answer. He kept reading. Then he looked back at the top of the page as though hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something easier to understand. "Ryan?" Richard asked. He slowly handed the paper to Daniel without speaking. Daniel read for nearly 30 seconds. His expression shifted from concentration to confusion, then to concern. Lauren stood and quietly moved beside him. "What does it say?" Daniel looked at her, but did not immediately answer. "It says." He stopped himself. "I think we have misunderstood the structure of these laboratory documents." Margaret reached toward the page. Daniel instinctively pulled it back. "No." She stared at her son. "Daniel?" Not yet. It was the first time he had refused her all morning. Frank watched silently. I remained seated, my hands folded together in my lap. There was no satisfaction inside me, only exhaustion. Ryan suddenly looked toward me with an expression I had never seen before. Not suspicion, not anger. Regret beginning to take shape before he even knew the full truth. "Emily," he said softly, "I do not understand any of this anymore." I answered with complete honesty. "Neither do I." At that exact moment, another notification appeared on my phone. The screen lit up across the table. This time everyone could read the sender before it dimmed again. Dr. Hannah Brooks. Secure message. Laboratory verification complete. Final physician review attached. Ryan looked at the phone, then at the page still resting in Daniel's hands. For the first time that morning, he seemed to realize that whatever he believed had happened was no longer the story unfolding in front of him, and that the people who had once spoken with one voice were no longer standing beside him at all. The notification remained glowing on my phone for only a few seconds before the screen faded to black again, but no one at the table seemed able to look anywhere else. Dr. Hannah Brooks. Laboratory verification complete. Final physician review attached. Nobody reached for it. Nobody asked me to open it immediately. Somehow the room had changed from demanding answers to fearing them. Ryan slowly lowered himself back into his chair. He looked exhausted in a way I had never seen before. His shoulders, once stiff with certainty, now seemed too heavy for him to carry. "Emily," he said quietly, "would you read the message?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Not today." My answer surprised him. "It surprised me as well." Frank nodded with quiet understanding. "That is a wise decision." Margaret finally spoke, though her voice no longer carried its familiar confidence. "If there is something that clears this misunderstanding, perhaps we should know now." I met her eyes calmly. For hours this morning, everyone expected me to explain myself before I was ready. I am not going to make that same mistake with my own truth. She lowered her gaze. No one argued. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt respectful for the first time all day. Richard reached across the table and gently placed his weathered hand over mine. "Emily," he said, "I owe you more than an apology." I smiled softly. "Thank you, I should have spoken sooner." His voice trembled slightly. "I have spent too many years believing that keeping peace meant remaining quiet." I squeezed his hand gently. "Sometimes we all learn too late." Ryan stared at his father before turning back to me. "I thought I was protecting myself." "I know." Instead, he stopped speaking. Words seemed too small for whatever he was feeling now. Frank finished his coffee and carefully folded his napkin. The hardest lessons rarely arrive when we are prepared for them. Daniel looked toward his younger brother. "Ryan, certainty feels safe, verification feels slow. Most people choose the faster path." Ryan nodded without lifting his eyes. Lauren quietly wiped away tears she had tried to hide. "Emily, I never really got to know you, did I?" I smiled gently. Maybe none of us truly knew each other as well as we believed. The Christmas lights reflected softly against the dining room windows. Outside, children laughed while building snowmen across the street. Life continued with remarkable indifference to heartbreak. Somehow I found comfort in that. I realized the world had not ended simply because my own had cracked open. Frank stood and buttoned his coat. I should let this family have the conversations that still need to happen. Before leaving, he turned toward me. "Emily, yes? You already know this, but I will remind you anyway." He smiled kindly. "Peace and surrender are not the same thing." I nodded. "I will remember." After he left, the house became strangely quiet again. Ryan remained seated across from me. "I wish I could go back to this morning," he whispered. "So do I." He looked hopeful for a brief second before I finished my thought. "Not to change your mind. To remind myself that I deserved to speak before anyone judged me." His eyes filled with regret. He nodded slowly. "You did." Margaret rose from her chair and carefully walked toward me. Every step seemed heavier than the last. She stopped beside me, her hands folded together. "Emily," she said softly, "I thought I was protecting my son. I believe you." She looked surprised by my answer. "You do?" "Yes." I paused. "But protecting someone by assuming another person's guilt is still unfair." Tears gathered quietly in her eyes. "I do not know how to fix this." "Neither do I." It was the most honest answer I could give. Some things cannot be repaired by finding the right sentence. Richard helped Margaret sit down again. Daniel quietly gathered the scattered medical papers into their proper order, smoothing each page before handing the folder back to me. "These belong to you," he said. "They always did." I accepted them with both hands. "Thank you." Ryan looked at the tiny cream-colored gift bag still resting beside my chair. It had survived the entire morning unopened. He reached toward it, then stopped. "May I?" he asked. I looked down at the bag for several seconds. Inside were still the little white baby socks embroidered with the words, "See you next Christmas, Grandma." They no longer belonged to the future I had imagined, yet they still belonged to my child. I slowly shook my head. "Not today." He withdrew his hand immediately. "I understand." For the first time since I had married him, he had asked instead of assumed. It came far too late, but I noticed it anyway. I stood and slipped the folder gently into my purse. Then I picked up the little gift bag. It weighed almost nothing, yet somehow it carried every version of the woman I had been over the past 6 years. The woman who tried harder, the woman who stayed quiet, the woman who waited for acceptance. As I walked toward the front door, nobody tried to stop me. Nobody demanded another explanation. Richard embraced me gently. Lauren whispered, "I am sorry." Daniel simply nodded with quiet respect. Even Margaret looked at me with eyes that no longer searched for evidence, only understanding she wished had come sooner. Ryan followed me onto the front porch. Snowflakes drifted slowly between us. "Emily," he called softly. I turned back. "Whatever happens after today." He struggled to finish the sentence. "I hope one day you can remember me as more than the man who failed you." I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "That will depend on the choices you make after I leave, not the promises you make while I am standing here." I stepped toward my car, breathing the cold December air more deeply than I had all morning. For the first time in years, I realized that walking away did not feel like losing my family. As I placed one hand gently over my stomach before starting the engine, I understood that everything I thought had been taken from me had also cleared the path towards something far more precious, and for the first time, I found myself wondering whether the next chapter of my life had been waiting for me long before this Christmas morning ever began. When I drove away from the Walker house that Christmas morning, I did not know exactly what the future would look like. I only knew I could no longer build it around the hope that someone else might someday choose to believe me. Snow continued to fall across Franklin as I pulled onto the quiet road. The little cream-colored gift bag rested on the passenger seat beside my purse, exactly where it had been when I arrived a few hours earlier. The only difference was that now I understood the gift had never really been meant for that dining room. It belonged to a future that had not yet been written. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Dr. Hannah Brooks in her office. She carefully walked me through every page of the completed laboratory packet. She explained how one report had been separated from the original sequence before the records were reviewed, how the missing context had led to assumptions that should never have been made, and how the complete documentation removed the uncertainty that had fueled so much pain. She also reminded me that medicine required patience, precision, and complete information. People deserve that same standard, she said gently as she closed the folder. I smiled faintly. I wish we remembered that outside hospitals too. She smiled back. So do I. I left her office carrying no anger, only clarity. The legal process moved quietly over the following months. Ryan asked more than once if we could begin again. We met twice with counselors, not to rebuild our marriage, but to learn how to become respectful parents to the child we had both once dreamed about. During one conversation, he looked at me with tired eyes and asked, "Do you think you will ever forgive me?" I answered truthfully. Forgiveness and returning are not always the same journey. He nodded. This time he did not argue. He simply accepted the answer. That was the first decision I had seen him make without looking towards someone else for approval. Margaret wrote me several letters. The first tried to explain. The second admitted regret. The third contained only a single sentence. "I should have listened before I judged you." I kept the letters not because they erased what happened, but because they showed that even deeply rooted habits can change when people choose honesty over pride. Richard visited often after my daughter was born. The first time he held his granddaughter, his hands trembled with quiet joy. "She has your eyes," he whispered. I laughed softly. "She has her own." He smiled through tears. "You are right." Lauren slowly became someone I could speak with again. She once confessed, "Growing up, I thought loyalty meant agreeing with the loudest person in the room." I answered, "Sometimes loyalty means asking difficult questions before choosing a side." She nodded thoughtfully. Daniel remained the steady, thoughtful man he had always tried to be. One afternoon he told me, "The law teaches us that evidence matters. This family learned that character matters just as much." Frank continued to appear in my life from time to time. Occasionally we shared coffee in a quiet cafe downtown. We rarely spoke about that Christmas morning anymore. One afternoon he looked out the window before saying, "You know what impressed me the most?" I smiled. "I am almost afraid to ask," he chuckled. "You never tried to win." I thought about his words for a long moment. "No," I finally replied. "I only stopped trying to lose myself." Life became wonderfully ordinary. There were sleepless nights with a newborn, tiny socks drying beside the laundry room window, first smiles, first steps, bedtime stories, and Saturday mornings when pancakes somehow ended up on every surface except the plates. Peace did not arrive all at once. It settled quietly into small routines, the kind I had once overlooked while waiting for dramatic change. Looking back now, I understand that the greatest gift I gave my daughter was not a perfect family. It was a mother who finally believed her own worth did not depend on another person's approval. If you are listening to my story while carrying your own invisible heartbreak, I hope you remember this. You do not have to shout to defend your dignity. You do not have to become cruel because someone misunderstood your kindness. Protect your heart, speak your truth with calmness, walk away from places where your voice is never welcomed. The people who truly deserve to remain in your life will never require you to abandon yourself in order to keep them comfortable. Healing rarely arrives through revenge. More often, it begins the quiet moment you stop asking people to see your value and start living as though you already know it. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Sharing these memories has reminded me that pain becomes lighter when it is carried together. If this story has stayed with you, if it reminded you that hope can survive even the hardest seasons, I would be grateful if you left a like, subscribed to the channel, and shared your thoughts in the comments, but only if this story truly spoke to your heart. Somewhere, another person may read your words and realize they are not as alone as they believed. The most important lesson I carried away from that Christmas morning was never about betrayal, it was about identity. People may misunderstand your silence. They may question your motives. They may even rewrite your story without asking you a single question. But none of those things can change who you truly are. On the following Christmas, after my daughter had fallen asleep, I opened the little cream-colored gift bag one final time. The tiny white baby socks were still folded neatly inside, embroidered with the words, "See you next Christmas, Grandma." I smiled, placed them carefully into her memory box, closed the lid, and looked out through the window as gentle snowflakes drifted beneath the porch light. For the first time in many years, the silence around me no longer felt empty. It felt like home.